Today, we're diving into a story that's, well, it's just full of contradictions. It's about a moment in the war in Ukraine where two completely opposite things were happening at the exact same time. On one hand, you had diplomats in Miami talking about peace, and on the other, hundreds of drones and missiles were raining down on Ukrainian cities, right before Christmas. So how on earth do those two realities collide? Let's get into it.
So picture this. It's December 23rd. People across Ukraine are, getting ready for the Christmas holiday. But that night, it wasn't about celebration. Instead, the sky just lit up with a massive, coordinated aerial assault.
Okay, so what exactly happened here? First, let's just look at the sheer scale of this holiday attack and a really stark warning that unfortunately came true just a few days later. Right after the attack, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky didn't mince words. He basically framed it like this: the killing is continuing because, in his view, the world just isn't putting enough pressure on Russia to stop. It was a really direct plea. And to really get a sense of the scale we're talking about, President Zelensky reported that over 600 drones were used in this one single overnight assault. Just think about that. An immense swarm aimed at targets all across the country. And it wasn't just the drones. This was a multi-pronged operation. Along with those 600-plus drones, officials in Ukraine said more than 30 missiles were launched. This just shows you the intensity and the level of coordination behind the whole thing. Now, here's the thing. This attack wasn't a complete surprise. It's actually kind of chilling. Just a few days before, President Zelensky had gone public, warning that a major Russian assault was likely coming right around the Christmas holiday. And then, well, his prediction became a very grim reality.
So, you have this massive attack. What did that actually mean for people on the ground? Let's look at the direct consequences of these strikes, the human cost and the devastation it caused.
The human cost was immediate and heartbreaking. Ukrainian authorities reported that at least 3 people were killed. And just tragically, one of those victims was a 4-year-old child in the Zhytomyr region. The attack also went straight for Ukraine's energy grid, and this was happening as temperatures were dropping close to freezing. Ukraine's acting energy minister said that power was, quote, almost completely lost in these 3 regions, and a lot of other places were hit with major outages too. You know, this observation from a correspondent in Kyiv really paints a picture of the immediate aftermath. When a residential building got hit, the first thing people had to do wasn't just clear away the debris. It was this frantic race against the cold. You had workers rushing to board up blown-out windows with plywood, just trying to keep families from freezing. And the impact of this went far beyond just the initial blast. This quote from Alexandra, a teacher in the frontline city of Zaporizhia, really stuck with me. He's talking about his reality: constant air raid alerts, getting maybe 4 or 5 hours of sleep, and what he called a general feeling of the lack of civilization, as just, basic normal life disappeared. Okay, so here is where the story gets even more complicated. Because while all of this was happening in Ukraine, something very, very different was going on thousands of miles away. It's really a tale of 2 completely different realities. This timeline really shows you just how fast everything moved. Over the weekend, you have US, Ukrainian, and Russian envoys holding peace talks in Miami. Then on Monday, Zelensky gives his public warning, and by Tuesday, that massive assault is already underway. The sequence of events is it's stark. And this is where that disconnect becomes so incredibly clear. I mean, just look at this. On one side, in Miami, you're hearing all this hopeful, diplomatic language. The talks were called productive and constructive. They're focused on a framework for ending this war. And on the other side, the brutal reality in Ukraine. A massive attack launched right after a proposed Christmas truce was reportedly rejected. It's like 2 different worlds.
So what does all this mean? Where does the conflict go from here? In this last part, let's try to assess the path forward by looking at the conflicting stories and what this whole escalation might signal.
As we've seen so many times in this war, the 2 sides told very different stories about what happened. Russia's defense ministry claims they only hit energy and military transport infrastructure. But President Zelensky said the targets were civilian sites and, in his words, essentially the entire infrastructure of daily life.
From the Ukrainian point of view, the timing of this was absolutely not a coincidence. A lawmaker, Alexander Mereshko, basically said the attack was a deliberate signal, a message that Russia isn't actually serious about negotiations that would lead to a real ceasefire.
And it's really important to remember, this attack didn't happen in a vacuum. According to Ukraine's acting energy minister, this was the 9th massive assault on the country's energy system in that year alone. So you can see this pattern. It suggests a sustained strategic campaign to cripple Ukraine's ability to function, especially during the freezing winter months.
All of which leaves us with this final, really challenging question. When you have the language of diplomacy happening at the exact same time as the reality of destruction, it just forces you to ask, what is the actual path to peace here? And how can these two totally opposite realities ever be reconciled?